Hello and welcome to my channel. This is my drawing of the Witch King, the leader of the Nazgul from the Lord of the Rings. I'm going to be doing this in charcoal. Let's have a look. I'm going to start with the sketch. The size of the paper is going to be about 9 times 12 inches. And I'm going to be working in charcoal. I'm mostly going to be using the Kohinoor charcoal pencils. Most of the work is going to be done with a Kohinoor Gioconda extra soft charcoal pencil. I'm going to use some other things such as the Kohinoor silky black pencils for a few details here and there. And I'm also going to use some charcoal powder, which I plan to create by sharpening one of my pencils. For blending, I'm going to use brushes, tortillons, and my fingers. Now I'm positioning these openings for the eyes and the mouth. And I'm also going to have to try to figure out what to do with the shoulder area and with the rest of the body. I'm going to put down some charcoal powder here. Like I said, I created this charcoal powder by sharpening my pencils. So I'm just going to use that charcoal dust. I need a substantial amount of material because this is going to be a pretty dark scene. So there's going to be lots of charcoal dust flying around. I am smudging that and pushing that around with my finger because fingers are great blending tools. I have to be careful around the edges because that needs a little bit more precision. So I'm trying to push in as much of the charcoal as I can, or as close to the edges as I can, without ruining the outline of my sketch. But the rest of that work will have to be done with other tools. So one of the things I like about this particular image is the strong contrast between the left side and the right side of the Witch King's head, or his helmet. This line here is the edge between the light side and the shadow side. The light is coming from the left side, or it's coming more from the left side. So the right side is going to be the darker shadow side. And this strong contrast is going to help me create a more realistic looking subject with more of a feeling of depth and volume. Now the light side of the helmet, I'm going to shade that with a bit of willow charcoal. And willow charcoal is very soft and it's easily moved around, it's easily manipulated. There are a number of horn-like shapes or thorn-like shapes on the helmet. The helmet is supposed to look like some sort of a crown. And if you look at the overall shape of the helmet, it looks really scary. It kind of looks like a combination of a crown and a skull, like a skull of an animal, like a stag or a deer or something. Now, as for these edges here, I have to clean them up with a pencil eraser, but they also need to be a lot lighter because these are the edges of a metallic object, so they're going to be reflecting a bit of light, and there's going to be some scratches around those edges, which is why they're going to appear lighter. And I want to do my best to imitate the texture and appearance of a metallic surface, and I want it to look like worn metal that has already seen some use in battle and things like that. So I'm adding some of these small highlights and scratches around the edges, just trying to imitate the appearance of the surface of metal or metal helmet. And I'm going to add some other shapes using pencils and tutilians. I'm going to add a bit of shadow here from these spikes or horns, because the light is coming from the left side, so they're going to be casting a bit of shadow to the right, and that's going to add a little bit of depth to my drawing. I need to go and define these horns on the other side as well. So like I said, your fingers are great blending tools, but there's only so much you can do with them, because there are some smaller shapes and smaller places where you can't really go in with your finger, even if you have smaller fingers. And that's where you have to use your blending tools such as brushes and tutilians and your pencils and erasers as well to clean up the edges, because it's very important to have those clean edges. I'm drawing some highlights on these spikes here, because I want to make them look a little more round. So it's important to have a clean edge between your subject and the background. But there will be parts of this drawing where I will make the edge deliberately less defined. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Right now I'm just trying to clean up the edge around these horns here. Now the thing about using, I'm just going to move on to drawing these openings for the eyes, and these are going to be completely black because obviously there is no living person behind the helmet. So the problem is that when you blend largely with your finger and you have to go in and work on those smaller shapes, different blending tools have different effects, and that can sometimes create problems when blending these smaller areas, because sometimes they can be a little bit lighter than you want them to be. So here around the ridge of this opening for the eye, we have an area of lighter value because it's kind of sticking out a little bit, almost like an eyebrow area. So I made that a little bit lighter with my pencil eraser. And now I just added a bit more charcoal, and I'm blending a bit more and adding a bit more value on the right side. By the way, the pencil eraser I'm using is a Kohinoor eraser and a pencil. It can be sharpened. And in addition to that, I'm also using a Faber-Castell kneaded eraser. So I like to use a combination of different erasers as well as different blending tools. As for the pencils, like I said, most of the work is going to be done with a charcoal pencil here. These charcoal pencils are pretty soft, but at the same time, they're also pretty dark, as you can see, but at the same time, they can be sharpened pretty well, which is one of the things that I like about my charcoal pencils. I don't like them. I don't like it when I have to be careful when sharpening them. I have to clean up a little bit around this shape. And now I'm moving on to defining some shapes on the right, some more of these cone-like shapes. Here I'm actually going to cover a bit of the background with a piece of willow charcoal. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it'll make blending and taking away value a bit easier, because willow charcoal and vine charcoal, they're so easily moved around, they stick to the paper a little bit less than compressed charcoal. So when I move them around with a brush, I can control the amount of value, and I can take away value and make something lighter just by dabbing it with a brush. Now this is getting a little bit too light. I want this side to be a bit lighter to create some contrast with the shadow side of the Witch King's head. But I still have to make the edge on the right a little bit darker. That's why I added a bit of charcoal powder. Now here I'm continuing to work with a charcoal pencil around the edge of this mask or this helmet, and trying to define the edge between the helmet and the hood that is behind it. Now I'm going to be shading the rest of the left side of the helmet here using a piece of willow charcoal. Just adding a bit more value and then pushing that around with a brush. For blending I mostly use flat brushes. I can use softer synthetic brushes or harder bristle brushes. They blend differently, but I like to use different kinds of brushes just to see what works in different situations. Now here on the left I'm going to add some suggestions of this hood behind this helmet, and I'm going to add some of that at the top of the head here as well. And I'm going to make that part a little bit lighter because for two reasons essentially. First, to stay consistent with the light source which is coming from above, and also to create some contrast with a darker background. Now I'm going to work over that with a brush, and then I'm going to move on to this central part of the helmet. I need to clean up these edges. We have some sharp shapes here, and then I'm going to work around that with my charcoal pencil. On the right side I'm just going to create some suggestions of shapes around the shoulder to the right. This part is going to be a little bit darker because it's in the shadow. I'm going to try to simplify some of these parts of the body and fade the rest of the body into the dark, into the black area around it. I'm just going to cover this opening here in the middle of the helmet. It looks kind of like a gaping mouth. If I accidentally go over some of the edges, I can fix them a little bit later, clean them up using erasers. I'm going to do a little bit of blending with my finger just to push that in, because when you blend with your fingers you tend to get darker tones because the texture of the skin and the natural oils from the skin, they tend to make the charcoal stick to the paper a little bit more. So that's something to keep in mind as you're blending, because as I've already mentioned, different blending tools have different effects. Now I'm going to shade the rest of the helmet here on the left, this lower portion of it, as well as the body here on the left. And I'm using a piece of willow charcoal for this. It looks like a mess now, but I'm going to blend, I'm going to refine it a little bit, and this bottom part is not going to be too well defined anyway. I'm not too concerned with any details in that area. What I want to achieve here at the bottom is I want to create, by the way I added a little bit of charcoal powder to make that bottom part even darker. What I want to achieve here at the bottom, I want it to look almost like a vignette, which is kind of like a dark vignette, which is popping out of this figure popping out of the dark, like a menacing shape. And I want to fade around the shoulders and around the chest area. So I want to leave those areas a little bit less defined. I'm going to create some suggestions of shapes, these folds in the robe and the hood, by using a little bit more of that soft charcoal pencil. But other than that, other than those few suggestions, I'm not really going to do much. Now, I'm going to refine these shapes a little bit by using a brush, and notice that I keep cleaning it. I just clean the tip of the brush and then I go over the area covered with charcoal, and what that does, it actually makes it lighter. So I'm gently lifting up a little bit of charcoal, moving it, creating some almost painterly effects simply by lifting up charcoal with my brush. That's a technique that I like to use when I don't want to use erasers, because erasers lift up a lot of the material and they tend to make an area a lot lighter, and I don't really want that here because I want to keep this blurry. But here around the shoulder area where we have some armor, I want to use a pencil eraser. So here I need a little bit more contrast, and that's why I'm going to use an actual eraser. But for those other lighter shapes around the neck and the hood and the shoulder area, I simply use the brush to lift up a little bit of the material. And I think this is a good way of creating those soft transitions. I'm just going to add a few details to this shoulder armor here. Nothing fancy. And then I'm going to go in here and add a bit more shadow around the helmet, and clean up its edges a little bit, pull some highlights, defining its shape a little bit better. And I also want to draw some small scratches and dents and things like that to make the appearance of the helmet look a little more realistic and weathered, battle worn. Also cleaning up these edges and making this cheekbone area of the helmet stand out a bit more, because it has a protruded part around the cheekbone area, and then it kind of sinks in, so the shape looks kind of gaunt and scary. Just adding a bit more value on the side of the helmet, and now I'm gonna try to use a pencil eraser again to refine this bottom part of the helmet, which looks really sharp, almost like some sort of knives or something. And I feel like this part here at the bottom needs to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to add a little bit more value to it and push that in with my finger. But the other side of the helmet on the right needs to be even darker, because that's in the shadow and it's facing away from the light source. So I added even more value there. I need strong contrast between the light side and the shadow side. So I push that in with a brush, and the good thing about brushes is that while they blend, they also allow you to retain a little bit of the texture. So I don't want to kill all of the texture that I created with my pencil. I want the surface of the helmet to look a little bit rough. Now this edge here is facing the light source, so it's going to be a little bit lighter. And I'm also adding some random strokes here and there to make the surface of this helmet a little bit more interesting. I keep calling it the helmet or a helmet. I suppose it looks like a mask of some sort or a crown. Depends on how you see it, I suppose, but I'm just going to keep calling it a helmet, because it does have some features of an ancient, or a helmet that was used in ancient times or even medieval times. I added some charcoal powder here to the right, and now I'm going to do a bit of blending. I'm going to push that charcoal around, and I want to make this area just dark enough to so that the head would stand out. But here around the neck to the right, I want the hood and the robe to be a little bit darker than the background. So sometimes you can create the contrast between your main subject and the background by making the background darker. Sometimes some parts of your main subject are darker than the background. You have to create those contrasts in order to make your main subject pop out and look more three-dimensional. Now I'm pulling some really strong highlights here on the left around the shoulder area, because I felt that this shoulder area needed to be just a little bit lighter, because we have some metal here, some armor, and I pulled some strokes with my pencil eraser here to make that a little bit more shiny, at least at the top. And the rest of it is just going to fade into the dark. I'm just going to keep adding some small marks here and there, refining the edges and the texture of the helmet. Now it's time to work on these horns on the other side. I'm going to add a bit more value to them and clean up their edges. And once I'm done with that, the helmet will be mostly done. Now, like I said, I wanted this to look like some sort of a dark vignette where the figure is fading into darkness, fading around the edges. So I'm not going to bother defining the rest of the shoulder and the chest area. I'm just going to add some suggestions of folds in that robe, do a bit of blending, and create just enough contrast so that the main character, the main subject, would stand out. Now I need to remove the tape. Need to be careful with this. And finally, the drawing is done, and I'm going to put my signature in the lower right corner, and that's it. I think we're done now. This is what it looks like. I sprayed it with a bit of fixative. Now, if you like my content, don't forget to subscribe, check out my other videos, give me a like, comment, do all of those things. And if you want to see more content and longer videos, you should check out my Patreon. Thank you for watching. I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye for now.